let's jump into this one because this had been building for a while. We knew this was going to happen. We had Kevin McCarthy on the show before the Christmas New Year's holiday or the holiday season. And he was making the case pretty clearly on this show, if not me, then whom? Which I think that there are a few different layers, a few different points to keep in mind here, right? There's the what is the goal of this? There is, in my mind at least, a little bit of shoving, a little bit of elbowing with the new Congress after a disappointing midterm election cycle. And I'm sure you saw there were breakdowns of additional breakdowns of why the polls were off the way that they were and why everybody was expecting a different result looking at the polls, but the conversation we can get into later. And then there's the outside chance that this thing, the 118th Congress, with a number of GOP holdouts, could, for the first time since 1923, go into multiple ballots many times over. This would only have occurred, I think, a total of 14 times in our nation's history. 13 of those times happened before the Civil War, so it's been a while. Clay, are you concerned at all that this could backfire? People are saying, oh my gosh, what if we ended up with a Democrat as Speaker of the House because of this infighting? Or is this good? You got to throw some elbows. You got to get the locker room a little bit on their toes.
I don't know the answer to whether this is good or bad. It's messy. And I think in general, there's a belief that things that are messy are bad. But sometimes that's not true, right? Sometimes a fight is necessary in order to get things clarified. And so what would be the absolute worst case scenario is somehow Republicans so bungle this that Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat majority leader right now, ended up as the speaker. I find the chances, I find it inconceivable that Republicans could be so incompetent that they could blow their majority and end up with a sort of some sort of middle ground where you end up with Hakeem Jeffries as the speaker. So I don't foresee that being possible, but I am concerned that the longer this continues, the more of a mess it might end up being. And if that were to occur, that it just makes the Republican Party look even more incompetent. There's a lot of anger, I think, out there over the 2022 midterms. And what exactly the message was and why we only won the House and did not win the Senate. And that, I think, is undergirding much of this discord that right now exists in the House.
I think that's why when people are asking me, they're saying, well, what do you think of this? And it's isn't it the Zen master, right? This is also, remember in Charlie Wilson's War?
Yeah.
He gets the horse and, then he breaks his leg. And is this a good thing? Oh, we'll see. Is this sensible politics? Is this a good idea for the GOP right now? If it puts would-be Speaker McCarthy on notice that the Freedom Caucus has some expectations that the machinery will change a little bit, I think that could be useful down the line. I also don't want to overpromise and underdeliver here for any of us with what can really happen. The Democrats have the Senate. The Democrats have the presidency. Not changing for 2 years. The best they can do is stand athwart the craziness and speak to the American people about what a positive agenda would look like, right? Well, Clay, what are they going to give everybody? What are they going to do if power is given back to them in 2024? So obviously all roads now for the Republicans lead to that decision. There are limitations. I know they're going to do a lot of investigations. Some of it I think is important because it's ongoing issue, right? For example, the COVID vaccine issue, which we'll talk about a lot today. Looking into that is important. It's important because I don't even know what booster we're supposed to be getting now. If we're,
and I don't even know, Buck. We've talked about this, kind of made jokes. I never got a shot. So let's presume that suddenly Dr. Fauci took control of my mind like Jedi style, would I be supposed to go get 5 shots? Like, would I have to spend the next 6 months, like, spacing these shots out? Or could I just jump straight to the bivalent or whatever it is, Omicron? Because there's no reason to get an alpha, shot at all, right?
Fauci would tell you, Clay, you have 2 arms, one for each series of 3 inoculations against COVID. This is what... No, I mean, it makes no sense. None of this is adding up anymore. But it is remarkable. I think the media is a little quieter about... And let's dive into some of that COVID stuff a little bit later, because we've been shooting messages back and forth. Masks, the Wall Street Journal, mask making comeback. The Wall Street Journal asking the question, is it possible that there is a selection process being made naturally by the virus in response to the very rapid pace of booster and vaccine, then booster? I agree with you. Calling this a vaccine is, we don't call it a flu vaccine. It's ridiculous, and I do think the language needs to change on that. But bring us back to the McCarthy fight for a second. I mean, here is Lauren Boebert, who won a pretty stunning victory, given that she was counted out early on in the vote counting process. Here is Lauren Boebert telling everybody that she's not voting for McCarthy, and she's not the only one, and this thing could go to a whole bunch of votes. Play it.
The deal was rejected, and as it stands, I will not be voting for Kevin McCarthy.
So she's not alone there. Clay, Matt Gaetz also coming out and saying that you don't drain the swamp by filling the swamp, something along those lines. I understand the anger, although let's keep in mind, Republicans did win the House, right? So let's not create a situation where the one thing that really there's Florida, there's the GOP House, and there's a handful of other things that went right. And let's not give away the things that went right because we didn't get all the things we wanted.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to remember a lot of this is still negotiation. And let's play cut 1, because Kevin McCarthy said, hey, Matt Gaetz said he'd be okay with Hakeem Jeffries, who is the Democrat majority leader, becoming speaker. Let's listen to that, but let's also keep in mind that is something you say, I think, that you don't actually mean, right? I don't believe that Matt Gaetz legitimately believes that or means that. I really don't. But let's listen to this. Cut 1.
Last night I was presented the only way to have 218 votes if I provided certain members with certain positions, certain gavels, to take over the church committee, to have certain budgets. And they even came to the position where one, Matt Gaetz, said, I don't care if we go to plurality and we elect Hakeem Jeffries and it hurts the new frontline members not to get reelected. Well, that's not about America, and I will always fight to put the American people first, not a few individuals that want something for themselves. So we may have a battle on the floor, but the battle is for the conference and the country, and that's fine with me.
Clay, they'd be in a stronger position here, and you and I know and like some of the members who are involved here, like them on a personal level. Anna Paulina Luna, new member from Florida, who was one of the 9 who signed the letter saying, look, we're not just going forward with McCarthy here. There's negotiation to be had. We know Lauren Boebert, and there's obviously a handful of others, actually more than a handful of others, who have a problem with McCarthy at this phase. Steve Scalise, for example, he would be the alternative to McCarthy, right? Are you getting a different outcome, really, from Steve Scalise being the Speaker of the House than Kevin McCarthy? I think the answer is no. And if you go then to Stefanik, she's certainly more liberal. She's more Democrat-leaning on a bunch of issues than either McCarthy or Scalise. So, you got to have a plan, right? If you're going to charge the hill, so to speak, well, that kind of makes sense in a number of ways here. But you got to have a plan. You don't want to just get pushed right down. So I'm not really clear on what they think they can accomplish other than the messaging and maybe some concessions. But it looks like those concessions from McCarthy just aren't. He's not going to sign on to anything that artificially constrains him as speaker, right? That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's where most people out there are sitting around. This, to me, feels like a lot of the negotiations when you're like, hey, are we going to raise the debt ceiling? Yeah, eventually the debt ceiling is going to get raised, right? You might shut down the government for a week or 10 days, maybe, but it's not like it's not going to get resolved at some point. That's where I come around on this, and I think your point is well taken here. For the average person out there listening to us, What is the practical difference between Kevin McCarthy in the speaker's chair and between, let's say, Steve Scalise in the speaker's chair? I know it matters a great deal to those individuals, but in terms of their practical ability to get things done, Buck, I don't think it changes anything, because we have to keep in mind, basically the House of Representatives exists now as a as just a roadblock.
That's brake on the crazy. They're just the brakes on the crazy train.
They don't get to direct where the train goes. They don't get to control where the train stops. They just get to be a roadblock. And is there very much difference in McCarthy as a roadblock or Scalise as a roadblock? Based on what I have seen, the answer is no. Maybe we're missing something. We've reached out to some of those 9 that are saying, hey, we're not going to vote for McCarthy. They have an open forum to come on this program and explain to us what we are missing. They are in the middle of this battle right now. But right now, I don't see as being a tangibly massive difference between the two.
What exactly is going on here with this 118th Congress, with these Republican, they're I think pretty understandably being referred to as the holdouts, because there's not that many of them, but there's enough of them that they could throw this into some degree of disarray. And look, brinksmanship, the thing about it is that if it goes awry, you don't look very clever. And if you do it just the right way, it can be seen as statecraft. It can be seen as high-stakes negotiation. But the thing about playing a game of chicken, I'm going to start mixing analogies here, or metaphors, or both, is if one of you doesn't pull off the road, you end up in a wreck. And we got to see where this is supposed to head. I am not entirely, well, I would put it this way, Clay. I'm not certain that all of the members are certain who are involved in this exactly what an acceptable end state is to them. We all know a totally unacceptable end state, I think everybody on the right understands, is that you have anyone other than a Republican who is going to be Speaker of the House. Absent an alternative, a realistic alternative who can get the votes, where is all this going? Now, Matt Gaetz, who has been fiery on this issue, he's out there saying that this is about oversight, and I think there's this notion, this case being made, this is about shaping the way oversight and the way hearings will be done in this 118th Congress by the House. Here is Gaetz, who's bringing up the Benghazi issue. Play 25, please.
We were threatened by my committee chairman to be on the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers, that if we did not vote for Mr. McCarthy, we would be removed from committees. Our position is that if Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House and we don't have an ability to ensure that there is oomph behind the agenda and energy behind our oversight, that the committee assignments don't mean that much anyway. I'm not here to participate in some puppet show where we pass a bunch of messaging bills, send them to the Senate, watch them die, fail to use leverage, and don't hold the Biden administration accountable. I don't want to relive the Benghazi experience where it's just theater pretending to be oversight.
A few things. The Benghazi hearings, unfortunately, did not achieve what they sought out to achieve, and that was clear early on. And I said it, and people got mad at me, and it was true. That as soon as Barack Obama won re-election back in 2012, this notion, I mean, it launched a few cable news careers, but it was not actually meaningful oversight, and there was no accountability had for Benghazi whatsoever. That's just a recitation of the reality of that situation, right? That's what came of it. But, okay, so what does that mean now? Gaetz is saying, Clay, that he doesn't want it to be hollow and just measures, but there are limitations to what Republicans can do in just the House. They don't have unified government. And beyond that, why aren't we hearing that they will eventually vote for a Republican and make sure there is no chance that after multiple ballots you would get a Democrat in the Speaker of the House chair? Because then I think everyone realizes, well, they've kind of said where this all goes, which means do they really even have any leverage in the first place? Do you know what I mean? They need to establish for everybody that they're not willing to blow this whole thing up. But the problem with being a person who's threatening to blow everything up is the moment you say you won't do it, nobody listens to you.
Yeah, that's why I don't buy it as a real negotiation strategy. I mean, I understand it. I understand why your analogy of like two cars that are playing chicken, the one who pulls at the last minute wins. But if neither pulls, then everybody dies. Like, that's not, a suicide pact is not, to me, a victory in some way. And here's what I would say. Jim Jordan has come on this show for a long time. Jim Jordan wants Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker. Donald Trump wants Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker. Donald Trump Jr. just went on Twitter and said basically a strategy that presupposes a Democrat might win is not a strategy. And I understand anger. Certainly. There are a lot of angry people out there. But anger isn't always a viable strategy. At some point, anger has to give way to practicality. So I don't know exactly how this is going to go, but the analogy I used earlier is, I think, an accurate one, where for your average person out there, a Republican is going to end up in the speaker chair. And I don't think, Buck, your life or my life or anyone else's life out there is going to be fundamentally altered by who's in the speaker chair, because we don't have the House. I mean, we have the House, but we don't have the Senate, and we don't have the White House. So this idea that you're going to be able to do things other than roadblock. Now, there are a lot of things I want him to do. I want him to do a hearing on the origins of COVID, Buck. I want to, and all of our government's response. I think we need a massive investigation into big tech, big media, and big government collusion as it pertains to our current environment. But those things are just about setting the table and telling the story. They aren't about implementing legislation, because we can't do that yet.
And I understand that there is a lot of frustration out there right now because of the massive omnibus that was passed. You were handling this, Clay. Usually the week before, the days before Christmas, you don't get something done like that by a lame duck Congress. But sure enough, they rammed through that massive spending bill, and there are people who are asking the question, understandably, what's the point if Republicans can't even be a roadblock? I understand that, and there is frustration around that rooted in what we've all seen, but we also need to not just cede the battlefield to the other side. There's no way that we can take our ball and go home with it. There's no way that we can avoid engaging with the realities of the Congress as it currently stands. And I don't think that I don't think you're going to see Chip Roy. I don't think you're going to see any of these other members of Congress as House Speaker. So ultimately, if the message has been heard, what is left to do here other than go forward with McCarthy? And I asked that question in all honesty. I think there are some people who are very frustrated by it, but I haven't gotten a really satisfactory answer to it. And I'm just going to – the notion – it's almost hard to say out loud, right? But the notion that after Republicans win a House majority, they could hand the Speaker's gavel to the Democrats – at that point, when we get emails saying, what's the point of voting Republican? I don't even know if there's a response. I'm just sitting here like,
no, I mean, and that I think is the concern, that you're painting yourself into a corner where the result actually blows up your own party and hands victory to the Democrats. Maybe the only thing you can say at this point, Buck, is that Republicans could get this incompetent is evidence of what we really need, which is a game plan that actually benefits everyone in the party, right? And the only thing that could benefit everybody in the party is cutting taxes, increasing economic output, being the party of responsible, sane adults that lifts the standard of living for everyone. And in the meantime, all this behind-the-scenes battle over who's speaker. I mean, what percentage, Buck, here's a good question for you. What percentage of Americans can even name who the Speaker of the House is?
Right. It's 99.9% of this audience, and it is, I don't know, 20%, 20% of America overall. I would say 20 or 30, maybe max. That could name the Speaker of the House.
They might know Nancy Pelosi because she's been there a long time. 15 or 20% at most are going to know whoever the Republican Speaker of the House is. Right?
You know, I think there's also part of this is dealing with a processing of the frustration that we had in the midterms that we suffered through. because, look, we didn't get enough to do all that we want to do. We didn't win a majority in the Senate, and we didn't win a big enough majority in the House. And that means, as we all know, elections have consequences. And so I think at some level this is the way that the system is processing this right now, and people are dealing with this, including members of the Freedom Caucus who are particularly annoyed at the reality, which is that you're going to have a House here that there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. There's got to be negotiation. There's going to be, you didn't get the sweeping victory you need, even on the House side, I think, to get everything that you want and to have the kind of trajectory of the Republican majority that you would want. It's reality, man. We got to face what we have. You know the Rumsfeld quote that people always say, you go to war with the army you have? Well, we're doing politics with the congressional majority we have, and it's not great right now.
McCarthy just said as he walked into the chamber, there is no scenario in which he drops out of the race. This is according to Manu Raju standing outside of the Senate. He says they can't give in to a few members who want something they can't get. And there were boos in the chamber just now, Buck, when McCarthy was nominated for Speaker. So we will follow this drama as the show progresses throughout today and maybe even into tomorrow if this doesn't end up with his selection as the Speaker. Let's go to some of your calls here. A lot of you wanting to react to the Speaker battle that is currently underway on the House floor. Mark in San Antonio, we should mention, Buck, that one possible resolution to this process is that you could end up with someone being selected who is not a member of Congress. That is possible. You could have a speaker come in from outside of Congress. Yes.
Clay, you're very busy with this show. Let's not get crazy here, all right? The draft Clay Travis movement into Speaker of the House. Everyone out there, settle down. Can't have it.
Yes, I would respectfully decline. The other thing out there that's worth understanding is that, to me, is quite fanciful because the job of the Speaker is very procedural. There is a great deal of detail involved in managing the House of Representatives calendar and everything else. So you typically need someone who's very plugged into the party apparatus to be able to do this job. But there are people who want to draft someone from outside of the House right now. Mark in San Antonio's got an idea, Buck.
You bet. Actually, we're looking for an alternative to McCarthy. I think legitimately that the bulk of the conservatives and your listening audience would love to see DeSantis step in as Speaker if he was willing to and if he could rally the support behind him. Because, frankly, we have an opportunity to rock the boat. I think that would absolutely rock the boat, and it would coalesce a lot of conservative support behind somebody that we all seem to be, we believe is really the standard bearer for the conservative movement right now.
Thank you very much for this. And I'll just say I'm in Tallahassee right now and going to be celebrating with the greater DeSantis world the inauguration of, after the reelection of, the person who I would argue is clearly the best governor in America. I don't even say the best Republican governor in America. I mean, I think that's a given, but the best governor in America based on results and based on how people move with their feet, right? It's like we always say, don't listen to the climate change alarmists in the media and in Hollywood because they're all buying their Malibu beach houses. What do they really do with their money? How do they really operate in their day-to-day? Look at how the people of America are responding to what's going on in Florida. They are flocking here in numbers. I don't even know if we've ever seen numbers like this before, hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Problem, though, with what was just raised, and an interesting idea, and I understand where our esteemed caller is coming from with it, Clay. There's only so much Ron DeSantis to go around, right? I mean, he's governor of Florida. Obviously, people are talking about him a lot for 2024 as a possible presidential contender. I think that, first of all, he'd like being governor more than he'd like being speaker, and the people of Florida don't want to give him up. So I don't think he's going anywhere. I think that's pretty clear.
I think he can accomplish way more as governor than he could as speaker. candidly. I mean, again, we're not talking about a Republican-controlled Congress, and we're certainly not talking about a Republican in the White House. So there's
this is
nothing that's going to get signed.
This is why I think it's so. We always are honest with everybody about what we think expectations should be, and how this is likely to play out. And when you have a very narrow congressional majority, which Republicans have, I mean, what are the things that can happen here? Oversight and spending. Oversight is largely messaging, because I'm just going to say it. We don't have the you-know-whats to start subpoenaing Democrats. Republicans just won't do it, because there'll be articles written in some of the old standard journals about how, that's not how we do things. And, it's just not going to happen. Our side won't play as rough as their side. And I hate to say it, but if anyone disagrees with me, let me know what evidence you have for that one. So on the oversight side, there are limitations. And then it's on spending. And Clay, our side likes to spend money too. Yeah, there'll be people in the Freedom Caucus, and there'll be obviously Rand Paul's in the Senate, but there'll be people that'll take principled stands against overspending, take a stand against sending another $100 billion to Ukraine, whatever it may be. But you're not gonna see enough people take that stand to prevent the spending, because look what just happened with the omnibus, right? So there's not that much that comes from this one way or the other. Is really what I think.
I understand why people also are of the opinion, I don't really care who Speaker is. And they're saying that because, hey, 18 Republican senators just cut the legs out of whoever the Speaker is because they voted for the $1.7 trillion omnibus before we even had the opportunity to take over the House. And so they can't even really do anything, Buck, until we get to September of this year when the new resolutions begin. And we will follow this, and maybe we're going to get at the last minute an acceptance of Kevin McCarthy. If not, it's Steve Scalise. And would they really go outside otherwise? I don't even know who the contenders would be outside of the House right now.
No, I think this ends up with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. And if it doesn't, we got a problem on our hands, because things have gone really awry, because I don't see what the third way is here. I don't see it, but could be wrong.
The first ballot has already been cast. The voting is underway, and Kevin McCarthy is not going to receive enough votes to be Speaker. So, on the first ballot, this means we will go to a second ballot for Speaker for the first time in 100 years. And again, I don't think, Buck, anybody has any idea how exactly this is going to play out, because there doesn't seem to be a second ballot that is suddenly going to resolve everything. And by the way, things could change at the last moment. They've cast their votes. They're going through alphabetically. You can change your vote before it becomes final. For people out there who are procedural wizards and want to know the nitty-gritty, your initial vote, I think you get a chance right before the final vote to cast it. So in theory, something could occur that would lead to people flipping their vote. But Kevin McCarthy, as people are making it known who they are voting for, does not have 218 votes in order to be able to take that next step and become Speaker of the House.
What is this supposed to end up with is the question that
I don't know.
And we're both, just so you know, we're in real time contacting and getting information from members of Congress who are in this floor fight and who are going through this right now. And I'm still wondering what exactly is supposed to happen here, because the concessions that I've seen talked about are things that McCarthy would there's just no way he's going to sign on to, at least their ability to have there's a sort of Damocles provision, if you will, where if he does things they don't like, they're able to exercise it, and it will stand in the way of the Speaker's ability to do his job. They're just not going to go with that. So I'm kind of sitting here. I'm a little bit befuddled as to what's the plan, if not McCarthy right now. And I guess maybe what they'd say, Clay, is, well, that's why we have multiple ballots, and we'll see how this goes. But I need to know that there's a plan, right? I need to know that this is not just, hey, who's flying the plane? It's like someone's flying the plane, and then we find out, no, there's an empty seat there. It's just a bunch of people hoping that it glides peacefully to the earth.
Here's the question, too, I would have, and I'm sure some of you out there are kind of laughing. Think about this. What if they just don't pick a speaker? Like, how long could it go without someone officially being named speaker? In other words, we already know that they have cut the legs out from underneath the Republican House because they've agreed to the spending omnibus that runs, I believe, Buck, through September 30th of next year. What does the House actually have to do? Right? Like,
that's what I was getting at before.
Yeah.
There's not really, you could conjure up the perfect Republican Speaker of the House for this 118th Congress. I mean, a combination of, you put them all together, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Moses. I don't know, whatever. Come up with your perfect individual. What are they really going to do? What is this person going to do?
Yeah, that's my thing. But Buck, are there any consequences if you can't get to 218? Right? Like, what does the House, what constitutional responsibility does the House actually have where there is a deadline and you would say, boy, if we don't have a Speaker of the House by March, like, what do they, I don't know. Like, the Senate obviously has to consent on a variety of different jobs, judges, all those things. Like, what does the House, now that the omnibus is done, what does the House do?
And I have to say, I hate looking at what the other team is doing with some degree of envy. But I think you have to, right? You have to, like, if you're getting beaten by some new offense, or if someone's managing to just kick your butt somehow, you have to be honest with yourself about that. And I see this going on right now. And like I said, all that matters here is the eventual result, really. So we can't know until we see where this goes. Maybe Kevin McCarthy will end up just being Speaker, and there'll be some sort of a deal or some concession, whatever it may be. We don't know. But I do know that Nancy Pelosi did not have these kinds of problems. I do know that Nancy Pelosi had the Democrats just in lockstep behind her to get the progressive left commie agenda as pushed through as fast as possible. And, you got to look at the things the other team does well and say, what are we trying to do either to emulate that or to counter it? And right now I feel like we have neither. We neither have the unity of Democrats in their authoritarian madness, nor do we have a plan to counter it right now with what we're doing. So I come back to what exactly is the point. And I don't get very satisfactory answers to this. But then again, Clay, maybe this in a week is one of those things that nobody even really remembers. It gets settled and it's all done.
That's why I come back to every time they say, oh, if we shut the government down, then basically when you hit the red button so many times and nothing happens, it's the boy who cried wolf scenario, right? When you're telling me, oh, this is politically unprecedented, there's no way we can and then it happens, and you're like, yeah, my life really didn't change at all. I think there are a lot of people out there saying, hey, does your life really change depending on what the Speaker? And I'm just asking the question, if there weren't 218 votes for anybody to be Speaker, and let's say we're in March and they're having their 746th, vote. What imperative does the House have to do? There's lots of things I would like them to do, right? The committees, hearings, all those things that I think are important in shining a light on a lot of different Democrat malfeasance. But what constitutional obligation does the House have to? Now they've already funded the government through September. I can't think of anything that they have to do, Buck. So how does our life change if they just keep voting marathon session over and over and over again?
Is there a part of you that thinks that maybe this is that a degree of chaos mixed with congressional inertia is the goal here? Do you think that's a part of this?
Like, I mean, you can't pass anything in the Senate. I mean, again, we have to go back to very elemental aspects of our government. They are a roadblock. Not having a speaker seems like the biggest roadblock of all. Now, I understand you want those gavels. You want to be able to shine the light on all of the Democrat shenanigans. But that's not necessarily. It's not like we're going to have a hearing and Joe Biden's going to be like, "Oh, you caught me. You know what? I have been taking millions of dollars. My son, I was the big guy. I'm walking out."
This is why I do think the Benghazi comparisons, and I've been saying this for years. Benghazi was the hearings I'm talking about, not the event and not, people from the agency and everything else that were involved there. I'm not talking about Benghazi in that context. Know a lot about that, and we can talk about that another time. The aftermath of congressional hearings with people pounding the table, it achieved nothing. I hate to say it, it achieved nothing other than launching a few cable news careers and getting some members of Congress some sound bites. So we have to understand that and not over promise, not believe that something bigger will come out of that. And look, I say this also as somebody who, Clay, I got a little bit of heat when I just said, and we had Carrie Lake on the show many times. You were a particularly
I love Carrie
big
Lake in terms
booster of hers as a candidate. But when they called the election for her opponent, Katie Hobbs, I just said, look, I don't know all the ins and outs of what's going on in Arizona in terms of the voting. I learned as much as I can, but I'm not there. I'm not running it. But I do know that there's no judge who's going to say Carrie Lake is actually the winner. And people got mad at me for this. They said, why do you say that? Well, it's because I understand the judicial system, and there was no chance that a judge was going to say that Carrie. And guess what happened? It's done. They're not going to do this. It's not going to happen. The courts have now thrown this out. So we all on our side have to always be living in Realityville. We have to be honest about what's going on and what's happening. And it's frustrating, but we have to process that frustration in a way that looks at it as a strategic possibility or in a way that looks at it as a learning opportunity instead of telling ourselves things that are comfortable. Basically, it all comes back to midterm, we didn't get it done. We just got an update that 19 members of the House of Representatives, Republicans obviously, have voted against Kevin McCarthy for Speaker of the House. It is immediately going to another ballot. So it is real. It is underway. This fight is going to play out. We will bring you updates as we have it. And I still sit here and wonder aloud, where is this for those 19? Where is this supposed to go? I ask that in all honesty. I don't really know. I've tried to get answers about what the plan is here. It seems like, look, there's resistance and there's a tantrum. I'm not sure which one this really falls into at this stage, because if there is no plan, then creating these risks and possible rifts, I think is, not the most wise option, perhaps. But we're kind of operating here, Clay, with it's a little opaque right now. It's a little like, wait, hold on a second. What are they trying to get out of this? There's supposed to be something. I'd like them to tell us.
I'll give you this, Buck. So 19 people vote. There were 5 different individuals who received votes for Speaker. Chip Roy, Andy Harris, and these people who voted against. But the only one that I'm seeing that I think is kind of interesting is, and I've seen this floated, Buck, the idea of someone coming in who would not be a congressman going forward. What if Lee Zeldin were the Speaker of the House?
You really like this drafting an outside person idea, don't you?
I just wonder. I'm just tossing it out there. I think someone who is currently a congressman, it may be hard. And look, they say they're going to keep going and Kevin McCarthy's not stepping down. But I'm curious how exactly this goes. And Lee Zeldin is someone who is not going to be in the caucus going forward, nearly won the governorship of New York, well-liked, I think, by many. And it would have – I don't think you can bring in a total outsider, I guess is what I'm saying. But he would understand how the overall apparatus of the House would work, if that makes sense. You can't just go draft like we got a caller. I appreciate it. But, hey, Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump is kind of the fever dream. He's going to be the speaker. Trump does not want the job, trust me. But that is that's kind of floating around out there as an idea.